The scorching summer heat shimmered over the dusty streets of Silver Creek as Lucinda Thompson stepped off the stagecoach, her heart as heavy as the trunk she carried. The year was 1878, and while the small Arizona Territory town offered a fresh start, the scars on her face promised the same rejection she'd known her entire life. "Need a hand with that, miss." The stagecoach driver gestured toward her trunk. "I can manage," Lucinda replied softly, adjusting the wide-brimmed hat that partially concealed the burn scars stretching from her left temple down to her jaw. She'd learned long ago that kindness often turned to pity, and pity to discomfort when people saw her face. At 24, Lucinda had accepted her fate as the schoolteacher who would forever live alone. Her aunt's letter had promised Silver Creek needed an educated woman desperately, and Lucinda needed somewhere to belong just as desperately. She made her way down the main street, aware of the curious glances from townsfolk going about their business. The mercantile, saloon, and sheriff's office lined one side, while a small church and what must be the schoolhouse stood opposite. Just as she reached the boardwalk outside the general store, her trunk slipped from her grasp, spilling books and clothing into the dirt. "Appears you could use some assistance after all," came a deep voice from behind her. Lucinda kept her face down as she scrambled to collect her belongings. "I'm quite all right, thank you." "Madam, I insist." Large, calloused hands appeared in her field of vision, gathering her books with surprising gentleness. When she finally glanced up, she found herself looking into the kindest pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His dark hair curled slightly beneath a well-worn Stetson, and unlike most people who first saw her scars, his gaze didn't flinch away. "Blake Zimmerman," he said, extending his hand after tucking her books back into the trunk. "Town's working ranch foreman." "Lucinda Thompson," she replied, hesitantly accepting his handshake. "The new schoolteacher." His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "We've been expecting you, Mrs. Holloway's been beside herself waiting for your arrival. My aunt mentioned her in her letters." Blake lifted her trunk with ease. "She's the mayor's wife, runs the boarding house where you'll be staying. Allow me to escort you there." As they walked side by side down the dusty street, Lucinda felt the familiar discomfort of being watched. She kept her head angled so her unmarred right profile was toward Blake. "Silver Creek's small but growing," he explained. "Cattle business is good and the railroad's coming through next year. Folks are starting to bring their families. That's why we need a proper teacher." "I'm grateful for the opportunity," Lucinda said. "I was teaching in St. Louis, but—" She trailed off, not wanting to explain how the parents had gradually withdrawn their children, uncomfortable with their teacher's appearance. "Well, we're mighty fortunate to have someone with your qualifications," Blake said, his voice warm and genuine. "Children here need learning just as much as city folk." They arrived at a 2-story white house with a wraparound porch adorned with flower pots. "Here we are," Blake announced. "Mrs. Holloway runs a fine establishment." Before they could reach the steps, the door flew open and a plump woman with silver-streaked brown hair hurried out. "You must be Miss Thompson. We were beginning to worry when the stage was late. I'm Alina Holloway." Lucinda braced herself for the inevitable reaction as Mrs. Holloway approached, but the older woman merely smiled warmly and took her hands. "My dear, you look exhausted from your journey. Come inside for some tea while Mr. Zimmerman takes your trunk up to your room." Surprised by the lack of visible reaction to her scars, Lucinda allowed herself to be ushered inside. The boarding house was clean and homey, with polished wood floors and simple but elegant furnishings. "The room at the top of the stairs will be yours," Mrs. Holloway explained. "It has a lovely view of the mountains. You'll take meals with us, breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, and supper at 6 in the evening." Blake carried her trunk upstairs while Mrs. Holloway poured tea from a china pot decorated with roses. "Mayor Holloway will want to meet you tomorrow, but for now you should rest." "Thank you for your kindness," Lucinda said, cradling the warm teacup. Blake returned downstairs, removing his hat as he entered the sitting room. "Trunks by the bed, Miss Thompson." If you need anything else, just let us know. Mr. Zimmerman has been most helpful, Lucinda told Mrs. Holloway. Blake's one of our finest citizens, Mrs. Holloway replied. Came here 5 years ago, worked his way up from ranch hand to foreman at the Double Circle. Owner's getting on in years, so Blake runs most of it now. I should be getting back, Blake said, settling his hat on his head. Cattle don't feed themselves. Miss Thompson, welcome to Silver Creek. I hope you'll be happy here. As he walked to the door, he turned back with a smile that made Lucinda's heart flutter unexpectedly. School term starts Monday. If you'd like to see the schoolhouse before then, I'd be happy to show you around tomorrow. After he left, Lucinda found herself staring at the door, puzzled by his easy manner. Most men avoided looking at her, let alone offering their company. He's a good man, Mrs. Holloway said, interrupting her thoughts. Not like some who come through these parts. Honest, hardworking, and kind to everyone. I'm sure he is, Lucinda replied neutrally, though something warm had settled in her chest. That evening, after unpacking her meager belongings, Lucinda stood at her window, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Silver Creek stretched out below, smaller than St. Louis but somehow more alive. A few cowboys rode past, heading toward the saloon. A woman called her children in for supper from a nearby house. For the first time in years, Lucinda felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps here, where people seemed to look beyond her scars, she might find if not love, then at least acceptance. The next morning, after a hearty breakfast with Mrs. Holloway and the other boarders an elderly gentleman who owned the town's newspaper and a young widow who worked at the mercantile, Lucinda donned a high-necked blue dress and pinned her hair in a simple chignon. She'd learned long ago that severe styles drew less attention to her face. She was studying her reflection, adjusting her collar when a knock came at the front door downstairs. Her pulse quickened when she heard Blake's voice greeting Mrs. Holloway. "Ready to see your schoolhouse?" he asked when she descended the stairs, his smile as warm as yesterday's. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with rows of wooden desks, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and a teacher's desk on a small platform. A blackboard covered most of the front wall, and bookshelves, though sparsely populated, lined the back. It's not much compared to St. Louis, I imagine, Blake said, watching her examine the room. It's perfect, Lucinda replied honestly. In St. Louis, I had 50 children in a room not much bigger than this. How many students will I have? About 25, ages 6 to 16. Some ride in from outlying farms, so attendance can be spotty during planting and harvest. Lucinda ran her fingers over the teacher's desk. Who taught before me? Mrs. Peterson tried her best, but she wasn't trained. Her husband moved them to California last month. Blake leaned against a desk. Most folks here value education, even if they didn't get much themselves. And what about you, Mr. Zimmerman? Did you receive much schooling? His laugh was rich and genuine. More than most cowboys. My mother was determined I'd know more than just roping and riding. I even went to college back east for 2 years. Lucinda raised her eyebrows in surprise. A college-educated cowboy, that's unusual. Don't let it get around, he said with a wink. Might ruin my reputation. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Lucinda forgot about her scars, forgot about all the times men had looked away in discomfort. Blake's gaze was direct and appreciative, and it sent warmth spreading through her chest. Would you like to see the rest of the town? He asked. I've got the morning free. As they walked along Silver Creek's main street, Blake greeted everyone by name, introducing Lucinda as our new schoolmarm. To her surprise, the townspeople welcomed her warmly, without the usual stares or whispered comments. At the mercantile, the owner, Mr. Peterson, insisted on showing her the school supplies he kept in stock. Anything special you need, Miss Thompson, you just let me know. Town council's approved a budget for books and slates. Thank you, Lucinda said, touched by his enthusiasm. Good books are essential. Blake guided her through introductions to the sheriff, the blacksmith, and finally to Mayor Holloway's office above the bank. So you're Aliner's newest boarder, the white-haired mayor said, pumping her hand enthusiastically. Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Thompson. We're mighty pleased to have a real teacher at last. I'm grateful for the opportunity, sir. Blake's showing you around. Good man, our Blake. Been trying to get him to run for town council, but he claims cattle are easier to persuade than people. Blake laughed. At least cattle are honest about what they want, Mayor. After leaving the mayor's office, Blake suggested lunch at the hotel restaurant. Best apple pie west of the Mississippi, he promised. Over chicken and dumplings, Lucinda found herself relaxing in Blake's company. He had a gift for storytelling, describing cattle drives and the characters he'd worked with in a way that had her laughing more than she had in years. So there I was, he continued, eyes twinkling, 19 years old, thinking I knew everything about cattle when this old bull decided to prove me wrong. Chased me clear across the pasture and up a tree. The other hands wouldn't let me live it down for months. You don't seem like a man who would run from a challenge, Lucinda observed. There's a fine line between bravery and foolishness, Blake replied, his expression growing more serious. I've learned when to stand my ground and when to climb a tree. As promised, the apple pie was delicious, warm with cinnamon and topped with fresh cream. Lucinda savored each bite, aware of Blake watching her with a gentle smile. You have a beautiful smile, he said suddenly, then looked almost embarrassed by his boldness. Lucinda's hand automatically went to her scarred cheek. You don't have to say kind things, Mr. Zimmerman. His expression grew serious. I never say things I don't mean, Miss Thompson, especially about beauty. Their eyes met across the table and something shifted in the air between them. Lucinda looked away first, heart racing, both frightened and exhilarated by the sincerity in his gaze. The weekend passed quickly as Lucinda prepared for her first day of teaching. She organized the schoolhouse, reviewed her lesson plans, and met more townspeople, many of whom were parents of her future students. Blake kept his distance, but she often caught sight of him in town, tipping his hat when their eyes met. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze. Dressed in her most professional navy blue dress, hair neatly pinned, Lucinda arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early to prepare. She arranged books, filled the water bucket, and wrote "Welcome Students" on the blackboard in her best handwriting. As 7 o'clock approached, children began arriving, some on foot from town, others on horseback or in wagons from outlying farms. They eyed her curiously, a few of the younger ones staring openly at her scars before being hushed by older siblings. At precisely 7, Lucinda rang the bell and watched as 23 children filed into the schoolhouse, taking seats by age, the smallest in front, teenagers in back. She waited until they settled, then stepped to the center of the platform. Good morning. I am Miss Thompson, your new teacher. I believe education is the greatest gift one person can give another, and I intend to give you my very best. She began by assessing their knowledge, quickly discovering that while some of the older students read well, others could barely manage simple words. Mathematics skills varied widely, and few had any knowledge of geography beyond Arizona territory. By midday, Lucinda had divided them into groups based on ability rather than age and assigned appropriate lessons. As they filed out for the dinner hour, carrying lunch pails to eat under the large oak tree beside the schoolhouse, she felt a deep satisfaction. This was why she'd become a teacher, to open minds and broaden horizons. She was eating her own lunch at her desk when the door opened and Blake entered, carrying a small package. Thought you might like something to celebrate your first morning, he said, placing it before her. Inside was a beautiful red apple and a small leather-bound book of poetry by Emily Dickinson. How did you know I love poetry? She asked, running her fingers over the embossed cover. Noticed you had several volumes in your trunk when I carried it upstairs, he admitted. Hope that's not too presumptuous. It's thoughtful, she replied, touched by his attention to detail. Thank you. How are the young scholars behaving? Remarkably well, eager to learn, most of them, Blake smiled. That's because they've heard what happened to the last boy who misbehaved. Supposedly turned into a jackrabbit, Lucinda laughed. I assure you my disciplinary methods don't include transfiguration. Shame might be useful with some of those Henderson boys. His eyes crinkled with humor. I should let you finish your lunch. Just wanted to wish you well on your first day." As he turned to leave, Lucinda called after him. "Mr. Zimmerman Blake, would you? That is, might you consider visiting the school sometime to speak about ranching? Many of these children will likely work with cattle, and hearing from an expert would be valuable." The smile he gave her made her heart skip. "I'd be honored, Miss Thompson." The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Lucinda taught during the day, prepared lessons in the evenings, and slowly made friends among the townspeople. Mrs. Holloway became almost a mother figure, offering advice and companionship. The mercantile owner's wife invited her to join a sewing circle, and several mothers brought baked goods to express their appreciation for her work with their children. Blake visited the school as promised, captivating the students with stories of cattle drives and demonstrations of rope tricks in the schoolyard. Afterward, he often found reasons to escort Lucinda back to the boarding house, their conversations ranging from literature to politics to childhood memories. She learned he'd grown up in Pennsylvania, son of a professor father and artist mother. He'd come west after college, drawn by stories of open spaces and opportunity, working his way from ranch hand to foreman through determination and intelligence. "Why stay in Silver Creek?" she asked one evening as they walked slowly back from the schoolhouse. "With your education and experience, you could go anywhere." Blake considered the question. "I suppose it's the first place that felt like home. People here judge you by your actions, not your background or appearance." His words warmed something inside her. "I'm beginning to understand that feeling." As autumn painted the surrounding hills in gold and crimson, Lucinda found herself looking forward to Blake's visits more than anything else. When he appeared at town socials or church on Sundays, her heart would leap traitorously. Yet she guarded these feelings carefully, certain that his kindness was just that kindness, not romantic interest, until the harvest festival in late October. The entire town gathered in the meadow behind the church, with tables laden with food, a small band playing cheerful tunes, and lanterns strung between trees. Children raced and played games while adults visited and danced on a wooden platform constructed for the occasion. Lucinda wore her best dress, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair, which she'd let fall in loose curls instead of her usual severe style. She'd even used a touch of powder to soften the contrast of her scars, though they remained clearly visible. She sat with Mrs. Holloway and some other ladies, watching the dancing and enjoying the crisp evening air when Blake appeared before her, looking handsome in a clean shirt and vest, his dark hair neatly combed. "May I have this dance, Miss Thompson?" he asked, extending his hand. Surprised, Lucinda hesitated. "I don't think, please," he said quietly. "Just one dance." With everyone watching, she couldn't refuse without causing a scene. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the dance floor, where several other couples were already moving to a waltz. Blake's arm slipped around her waist, his other hand holding hers gently as they began to move with the music. Lucinda kept her face turned slightly, the scarred side away from him. "You look beautiful tonight," he said softly. "You're very kind," she replied automatically. Blake stopped dancing, his expression suddenly serious. "Lucinda, look at me." Reluctantly, she turned to face him fully. "I'm not being kind, I'm being honest. You are beautiful not despite your scars, but with them. They're part of you, part of your strength." Tears stung her eyes. "You don't need to say these things. I've wanted to say them since the day you arrived." His blue eyes held her steadily. "I've wanted to tell you that from the moment I saw you collecting your books in the dust. I couldn't look away. Not because of your scars, but because of the dignity in how you carried yourself, the intelligence in your eyes, the gentle way you spoke." Lucinda's heart pounded so hard she was certain he must hear it. "Blake, please, I know you think yourself unlovable," he continued, his voice low and intense. "I see how you hide your face, how you're surprised when people treat you normally, but Lucinda, I've loved you from the first look." The music continued around them, but they stood still among the dancing couples, locked in a moment that seemed suspended in time. "You can't mean that," she whispered, though hope unfurled in her chest like a flower reaching for sunlight. "I've never meant anything more," Blake replied. I've tried to show you with small gestures, with time spent together, but I realize now I needed to say the words plainly. A tear slipped down Lucinda's cheek. Blake reached up and gently, so gently, wiped it away, his fingers brushing over her scarred skin without hesitation. "You don't have to answer now," he said. "Just know that my heart is yours if you'll have it." Then he resumed their dance, guiding her through the waltz as if nothing extraordinary had happened, though they both knew everything had changed. Later that night, Lucinda stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the star-filled sky, her mind replaying Blake's words. Could it be true? Could someone truly love her, scars and all? The hope she'd buried so deeply years ago fought to surface, terrifying in its intensity. The next day was Sunday. Lucinda sat in church, barely hearing the sermon, aware of Blake across the aisle, his eyes occasionally finding hers. After the service, as people gathered on the church steps to socialize, he approached her. "Would you walk with me?" he asked quietly. They strolled toward the creek that gave the town its name, away from curious eyes. The autumn sun dappled the path through golden leaves, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine from the distant mountains. "I meant every word I said last night," Blake began once they were alone. "But I understand if you don't feel the same." Lucinda stopped walking, gathering her courage. "It's not that I don't feel something for you, I do, more than I thought possible, but Blake, you should know how I got these scars." He waited patiently as she collected herself. "I was 16. Our house caught fire in the night, a lamp overturned. My father got my mother and brother out, then came back for me, but the roof collapsed." Her voice shook slightly. "He died saving me. I survived, but with these reminders etched into my skin." Blake's expression was compassionate, not pitying. "He must have loved you very much." "He did," Lucinda acknowledged. "But afterward, everything changed. My fiancé we'd been promised since childhood, he couldn't bear to look at me, broke our engagement, said no man would want." She gestured to her face. "He was wrong," Blake said firmly. "And cruel?" "Perhaps, but he wasn't alone in his reaction. I've spent 8 years watching people flinch when they see me, mothers pulling children away, men averting their eyes." "Not here," Blake pointed out. "Not in Silver Creek." "No," she admitted, "not here." "That's why I've begun to hope again, and that terrifies me." Blake took her hands in his. "Lucinda, I can't promise life won't bring more pain, but I can promise you won't face it alone, not if you'll have me by your side." Looking into his eyes, Lucinda saw no deception, no pity, only genuine love and admiration. The walls she'd built around her heart began to crumble. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "So am I," he admitted with a smile. "Love is the biggest risk there is. But the alternative is a life half-lived, and you deserve so much more than that." Slowly, hesitantly, Lucinda leaned toward him. Blake met her halfway, his lips touching hers in a gentle kiss that held both promise and reassurance. When they parted, Lucinda felt something inside her shift and settle, as if a piece long missing had finally found its place. "I think I've loved you too," she confessed. "I just didn't dare believe it could be real." They walked back to town hand in hand, aware of curious glances but beyond caring. That evening, Blake joined Lucinda and the Holloways for supper, where Mrs. Holloway beamed knowingly and the mayor raised his glass in a silent toast. As autumn deepened into winter, Blake courted Lucinda properly, with flowers, walks, and even a trip to the larger town of Prescott for a theatrical performance. The children teased her when Blake came to the schoolhouse with little gifts or to walk her home, but their teasing was good-natured. On Christmas Eve, after the town's celebration at the church, Blake took Lucinda to the Double Circle Ranch. They rode in his wagon through the starlit night, wrapped in blankets against the cold, to a hilltop overlooking the property. "I wanted you to see it," he explained, "all of it." Below them stretched the ranch buildings, corrals, and beyond, vast pastures that disappeared into the darkness. "It's beautiful," Lucinda said, her breath forming clouds in the frosty air. "Mr. Donovan, the owner, he has no children," Blake said. "He's offered to sell me the ranch when he retires next year, said I'm the son he never had." Lucinda turned to him, understanding the significance. "Blake, that's wonderful. It would be a challenge, a big responsibility." He took her gloved hands in his. But I believe we could build something special here if you'd share it with me." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box and opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Lucinda Thompson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled her eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had always belonged there. Blake pulled her close, his kiss warming her despite the winter chill. They were married in the spring, when wildflowers carpeted the hills around Silver Creek. The entire town attended, from Lucinda's students to the ranch hands who worked for Blake. Mrs. Holloway cried happy tears as Mayor Holloway walked Lucinda down the aisle in place of her father. Lucinda wore her mother's lace veil, which framed her face but didn't hide it. She no longer felt the need to conceal her scars, not with Blake waiting for her at the altar, his eyes filled with love and pride. "You look radiant," he whispered as she reached him. "I feel radiant," she replied, and it was true. The woman who had stepped off the stagecoach believing herself unlovable was gone, replaced by one who knew herself worthy of the deepest love. They moved to the ranch after a brief honeymoon in San Francisco. Lucinda continued teaching, riding to town each morning and back in the afternoon. In the evenings, she and Blake would sit on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, planning their future together. By the following spring, Mr. Donovan had officially sold the double circle to Blake, and Lucinda was expecting their first child. As her body changed with the new life growing inside her, Blake's love and admiration only seemed to grow. "I never thought I'd have this," she confessed one night as they lay together, his hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. "A husband, a child, a home filled with love. I always knew what I wanted," Blake replied, kissing her temple where the scars began. "I just had to wait for you to arrive in Silver Creek." Their daughter was born on a warm summer evening with Mrs. Holloway serving as midwife. They named her Hope for what had brought them together and sustained them. As Lucinda held her perfect baby girl, Blake sitting beside them with wonder in his eyes, she realized that the fire that had scarred her had also forged her into the woman she became, strong enough to journey west alone, brave enough to face a classroom of strangers, and finally, open-hearted enough to accept the love that had been waiting for her all along. "What are you thinking?" Blake asked, gently stroking their daughter's tiny hand. "That some wounds never fully heal," Lucinda replied, "but they can lead us to unexpected blessings." She smiled up at him, her heart so full it might burst. "You taught me that, Blake Zimmerman, when you loved me from the first look." "And I'll love you until the last," he promised, sealing his words with a kiss that held all the tenderness and passion of their journey together and all the promise of the journey still to come.